All right, so I got to keep these on for a second. I've come to know you and your expertise with things, even with vintage keys, as we've been doing a project around here fixing up all my keyboards, which are awesome. And even better now, you've modified my keyboard world, and I really appreciate that. And we'll do an example of some of those results here in a minute. But tell me about what fascinates you with the real deal keyboards. But one of the first things we can do to do that, let's show. I know one of your great loves is the Hammond organ, and just take a second and give us a little taste of each of these. And one of the amazing things about this Hammond A100 is just even starting it up. So yeah, take it over for a minute, Bruce, and then we'll talk about the value of the real thing versus modeled.
Mm-hmm. This is a Hammond, which is, it has an electromechanical tone generator. And so there's a motor that needs to come up to speed to get everything spinning. And so I'm going to do that right now.
It's like starting an old Chevy.
Yeah. Comes up to speed, and then I have to kick the amp on. And then I release the start button, and we're going. And tubes need to warm up, of course.
And then we would turn the power on the Leslie cabinet over there, too.
There we go.
All right, let's see what these things can do here.
That's a Hammond.
Yeah, baby. Sounding good.
And
real quick, though, show me like a chord with the fast speed.
So this has a rotary speaker associated with it. So right now, the rotary speaker is going in a slow mode, which gives kind of a phase shift thing. And I can kick that up to a high speed, and it becomes vibrato. But it's mechanical, so it takes time to come up. So you'll hear it come up to speed as I hold the chord and switch it to fast. And then you switch it off.
And you slow it down. But in terms of we spend a few months now sorting out all the little touchy things that go wrong with antique old instruments. And they're built well. When you talk about a piece of engineering, the Hammond organ blows my mind, especially after meeting you and knowing somebody that knows something about it. Look at the story of the whole invention is interesting, and we'll touch on that. But if you guys, get a quick shot of the back and inner guts of this thing, you talk about a feat of engineering that's just, really, really like next level, really. From back in
it was designed back in the 1920s, and they brought the first models to market in the 30s, and they produced basically that instrument up through the 60s. And at that time, it became too expensive to manufacture the mechanical tone generator. There's a lot of work, man. Yeah, a lot of parts in there. But they did a lot with the instrument to make it last forever. Now, this instrument was made in probably the 60s. This was one of the later models of this design, if you will. But it's basically the same design that they were producing since the 1930s. And like many products from that era, the owner of the company, his name was on the product. This is a Hammond organ. The owner of the company was Lawrence Hammond.
Right.
So people back then, they took pride in what they made in the sense that they wanted this instrument to outlast them. They wanted, when they sold this instrument to a customer, they wanted to know that 50 years, 75 years, 100 years from now, they could still be using that instrument. And this really will last 100 years or more.
Lawrence Hammond, like, came from a background of like building clocks, which brings you into the technology that's really behind this and the way that the motors work and stuff.
Yeah, they use a synchronous motor like a clock does, and that keeps the organ in tune. This instrument will never go out of tune. What other instrument can you say that about?
Nothing.
Right. As long as your power is pure 60 hertz. That's what keeps this running. Over in England, where they have 50 hertz, they use a different motor in their Hammonds, but otherwise the Hammonds are identical.
So what do you say to somebody that comes from the new generation? Be like, why would you even want to deal with this thing? I can get a sample of that on my MIDI keyboard, and it's,
that's a great question, because I've played the real instruments all my life, and I've played a lot of the samples. I still prefer the real instrument for a lot of reasons. There's in the case of like a stringed instrument, like a clavinet. A clavinet actually has individual strings. This has individual tone bars for each.
Like tuning forks, they look like.
Yeah, in a sense they are. Because of that, there's slight differences in the mechanical components. So every key has a character all its own. And when you get into a sampled version of that, they'll sample maybe a note and then spread that over some distance.
Yeah, they're getting pretty sick with their way. They're getting pretty good at it.
They have been real good, and they can now sample.
The original ones weren't as good, but it's still pretty amazing that you can do that. But
still, it's when you play the real instrument, you notice right away.
The responsiveness, number one, the way it responds to your touch.
And the other thing is the physical feel of the keyboard. There's no other keyboard that feels like this. There's no other keyboard that feels like that Rhodes. So you can get the sounds on any type of keyboard, but unless you're playing the actual instrument,
it's a real visceral
sounds. There's an interaction.
Response.
It induces you to do certain things.
Especially this thing, because it's got such a wide range of sound that lets you be so expressive with it. Mm-hmm. That's why you see it in churches. Organs are great for churches. They have that gospel-y, angels singing, sort of beautiful, because their fundamentals are pure tone. A lot of reasons why. But when you talk about something like this in the real electronics, every component has a contribution, and everything that you're trying to do, is something that someone gave you some very distinct switches on, which is something we'll touch on too. Like there's presets, like now presets digital, but he's got mechanical presets.
Yeah, the design of this was brilliant on many fronts, but one of them was this area here is a preset panel. And you could take any tone setting that you call up on this keyboard, and there are literally millions of them. There are millions of combinations of tonality that you can get out of this thing. And any tone you generate on the controls, you can program into that panel just by moving certain colored wires to certain screws.
Yeah, it's like a patch bait thing or something.
In a sense, it's like that, yeah. So that's how they created a programmable synthesizer, basically. That's what it is.
So the whole thing about the asynchronous motor and his background as a clockmaker, explain how that was a kind of a normal progression for this thing.
Well, it's actually synchronous motor.
Synchronous motor, asynchronous motor. Yeah,
it is asynchronous motor. So
it wasn't totally typo.
So he was an inventor. He invented a card table that would automatically deal hands of cards. Yeah. And he also had an electric clock. And in fact, his factory was called the Hammond Clock Company, Chicago, Illinois. And I have a very early Hammond at home that the name tag on it says the Hammond Clock Company.
And that would have been from the 20s or early 30s?
It was from the early 30s, yeah.
Yeah, because that's when I heard it was early 30s. Mm-hmm.
So Lawrence Hammond himself was not a musician. He was an inventor and owned a company that manufactured things. He got partnered with a guy named, I believe it was Hannert. And that was the musical input into creating this instrument. It was designed really to be a replacement for a pipe organ in churches.
He was really into pipe organs, which are fascinating.
Yeah. And at that time, too, you might see these in roller skating rinks or movie theaters back then in the 30s. You would have
hockey ring, ball games.
Yep, ball stadiums. Yep, right.
Yeah. But the gospel and the church thing brings so much soul to a song. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of R&B soul. Right, as soon as I hear a song with a great organ or Rhodes or something, I feel a warmth. Mm-hmm. Like it definitely.
Well, regardless, aside from the fact that it is an electric instrument, it really has an organic sound to it. Part of that is kind of the design, and whether it's a happy accident or they knew this, the tones in this thing are generated by individual sine waves that are added together. It's actually additive synthesis, kind of like a DX7. Yamaha DX7 synthesizer is based on the same principle.
Isn't like a Moog the opposite?
No, a Moog is also in like a sense it is because a Moog starts with waveforms that have a lot of harmonics, and then you filter out the harmonics you don't want. This is the opposite. You add together the harmonics that you do want. So all of the harmonics that you dial into this thing are generated by individual tone wheels. There's 91 frequencies that the tone generator generates. And we're just looking at the back half of it here, but each one of these is kind of like a pickup in the pole piece in a guitar pickup. It's a steel rod that's facing a wheel, and the wheel is spinning.
And it's got a little bump on it.
There's 91 wheels. They look like little gears. And the teeth around them, if you will, as they pass in front of this rod that has a coil wrapped around it, they generate an octave up, octave up, octave up, and octave down. So those are all octaves. And then you have the fifths.
You think that little static is just because it hasn't been
used played in a while. Yep. And there's a third in here also. So if you listen to all of them, let's see, you start here. Sounds rather musical.
Yeah.
Those are musical intervals. But they're really harmonics. So when you add them together, you get the final tone color. So it can be, by blending the harmonics, you can create any tone color you want. If you want something more mid-rangey, you take out the upper and lower harmonics.
And like we said in our early discussion, it's like some intervals of those harmonics are like, all of those are pleasing because they're all mathematically related.
They're all mathematically related, exactly.
I guess everything is, but it's different than like doing a half step or something.
And also, this is based on the idea that anything that vibrates is going to create these harmonics in this sequence. The difference will be from instrument to instrument in the blend of these harmonics, how much of each harmonic is present in the overall tone, and also the envelope of the harmonics. Like
gives you so much flexibility and like the end result.
Yeah.
Like all the way from Deep Purple to the clean church sort of expression. That's why I was saying the way it's really a specialist instrument too. Like, somebody plays piano can probably get around on it a little bit, but there's so much technique that the great B3 players or big organ players or whatever really know how to, at the same time, and even still, they might be doing bass pedals, left hand, right hand, changing the balance of the tone bars, switching from fast to slow on the Leslie.
Yeah, there's a lot to it.
There's chorus built in, there's percussion built in, there's, a whole host of things that allow you to, take the journey with the song and just keep like adding different flavors, or you find one that you like and you keep it. I mean, what's
me.
What's your go-to setting? What's your go-to setting sound?
My go-to setting, okay, for everybody out there who wonders, how do you get anything to sound out of a Hammond? My favorite setting is this: these 4 drawbars out, which are the first 4, and then you add percussion to it here.
That's rock and roll, man.
That's my sound. And then there's tricks you can do too. One of my favorites, and you've heard this on records too, is the slide up. And then where's the foot? Do we have a foot pedal for this thing or not?
No, we do. I may not have been 100% prepared in having it.
Okay, handy. I can do it without the foot pedal.
We're gonna have it for episode 2 for sure.
I'm gonna have somebody help me then. Somebody has to hit the switch when I tell them.
Well, let's see. Let's let Matt do it.
All right, Matt, you're going to hit the switch when I tell you. This nice switch sweater, here, I want you to tremolo, right? And I will.
The Aztec sweater.
When I do that, I will.
The Aztec sweater with the scorpion shirt. I love it, man.
So here's the move, right? Here's the move.
From
right?
grinding,
we've heard that.
Slow
exactly.
grunge to fast screeching yell tones. That wow, that's like got a lot of teeth up in that high range like that. Yeah. That's why you take it there and then you come off of it,
Yeah. Well, you always got to answer it with it. You got to come down.
Yeah. Right. But yeah, I mean the gliss. That's sort of what that is a gliss. In classical, they write gliss into the arrangement and stuff. So that's its version of a gliss, a back and forth.
Yeah, it's just a slide up to the note. But I mean, you start out with, I usually give them like a poundful down here. And I usually push the pedal just a little bit when I first hit it, just to let them know I'm there.
Right.
Right, so it's like a, right? And then while you're holding this down, that's when you hit the switch on. And then you just...
And it's funny, this is ringing a bell. I've probably had you replayed that on like 3 or 4 different records we've done. We pulled that one out a couple of times.
Yeah.
That's
the move.
Yeah, and then if you come back down, then maybe you flip your hand over and come back with your fingers. Is that how you do it?
Yeah.
You do the hand flip and then come back down?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, the fall off.
The fall off.
Yeah, that's a big one. And then, definitely, I mean, Hammond's going to have hundreds of these, but I guess this is more of a musical technique, is like the way pull-offs and like stuff sounds on here, just because the way the percussion can be set.
Oh, the percussion. Yeah, this is another thing. They added percussion sometime in I want to say the 50s. Organs before that didn't have it. You can add a kit to the older organs to bring it up to that spec. But basically, percussion is just a way of adding attack to the note. And they accomplish it by taking one of the harmonics, just one of the harmonics of your choice, either a second or third harmonic, and they sound it for just a second when you play a note, and then they fade it right out. So all by itself, it sounds like this.
Yes, don't.
Right. When you add that to the tone that you have dialed in.
Right. It's got a little thunk on top of it.
Exactly. It adds that doink.
So do the reggae, where you do they do the chop. Right. Right. That's where that really is cool.
And the thing that's cool about it, and I don't know if this was on purpose or just a byproduct of how they pulled it off electrically, but if you play legato with this setting, you don't get the strike again. You have to let off all the keys before you actually get that doink
after the first one
again. Yeah, right. So yeah, here's the first one. See? Those other 3 notes didn't have the doink.
I thought I heard it a little bit. I heard it a little bit. Yeah, that's definitely dominant, but
see,
it's a little bit of an illusion in a way too.
Right, you expect to hear it, maybe.
Yeah.
Right, but unless you let up, you're not going to hear it.
It's like a pebble drop.
Yeah. And then the second harmonic is a little more of a woody sound to it.
Right.
And that was the British guys always liked that one.
Yeah, man. Especially the low frequency, man.
Yeah, it's got that thunk. It sounds nasty.
Yeah. Same with like the wordless and the Rhodes too. The tone of the low frequency is just like the most beautiful bass, warm and and distortion. I mean, real distortion is your friend. I mean, it's like the ultimate compressor. It's like distortion is like 1,000,000-to-1 compression or something crazy. It's just like...
Well, we like distortion.
All the hair on it.
In the world of rock and roll, we like distortion because it's what we associate with things that are loud.
Yeah.
And we like loud rock and roll. And so when we hear distortion, we're like, yeah, it's rock and roll.
I think there's more to it even than that. I think that there's some brainwave shit to that too, where the tube generating the even harmonics are pleasing to your brain, Well,
and again,
that kind of warm, fuzzy attack is,
You're generating harmonics that have a pleasing musical relationship to what's going on.
Yeah, a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's perfectly pitched like that. Yeah, I mean, I think there's some, like, neurological things that are happening on certain, I'm sure on every instrument, but like in the positive sense. All right, well, there's a lot to crack open here, but this was cool to have you fired up. Real quick about the Leslie. I mean, this is an A100, which is sort of close to a B3. It's one of the big boys. And then there's two different types of Leslies from what I understand. I really love this one, the 147. And the organ powers that. And take it from there. Just go through the Leslie real quick, and then
Well, yeah, Leslie was kind of that was an attempt to make this organ sound more like a pipe organ.
Right.
And the guy who developed the Leslie actually was doing it based on Don Leslie. Yeah. Another guy with his name on the product, right?
Yeah, but they had different visions, though.
Yeah. But he bought a Hammond organ and didn't like the way it sounded. He thought it sounded a little one-dimensional compared to the organ at his local church.
Well, that adds a lot.
So in sitting in the church and listening to the organ, he sensed that, well, it seems like as the organist is playing, the notes are coming from different places, which would be true of a pipe organ. The pipes are in different locations physically.
And your ears are really good at pinpointing that, by the way. They're like to 1 degree you can pinpoint something because that's why you have 2 ears.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you know exactly where something's coming. Well, our lives have taught us that because we see something and then we hear it coming from there.
Yeah, but it's a pretty smart system with the two calculating the difference, like radar. Mm-hmm. It's our version.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, he figured, how can I do that? So he ended up developing the speaker that rotates, so that the sound is actually coming from different places.
It's so great.
Well, that was the original idea, but really it ended up being a really beautiful way to create vibrato. The organ itself has a built-in vibrato that is, it's a pitch fluctuation.
It's so different, though.
But it's not what a Leslie does. The vibrato, let me see if I can get it to turn off the percussion. That's the standard vibrato. I'll do it a little louder. So they're fluctuating the pitch of the organ. The Leslie
mechanically.
Well, it's electrically actually. It's they use a delay line and a scanner, and they scan along the delay line. If you ever changed delay settings, you'll notice it causes a pitch shift. Uh-huh. So what they're doing is they're tapping off
modulation. I mean,
off a delay line. There's an analog delay line. This was brilliant when they came up with this. An analog delay line and a scanner that scans back and forth across the different taps on this analog delay line.
Wow.
So you're progressively delayed as you scan this direction, and as you scan back across this stack, if you will, you're scanning in the other direction. So in one way you lower the pitch, and the other way you raise the pitch.
That's
so it's actually
cool.
pitch fluctuation on something that starts out with pure tones that are generated by mechanical means that can't change.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sick puppy sitting around thinking of that stuff.
Well, it's
evolution of a lot of people, probably.
It's actually brilliant electronic engineering is what it is.
Yeah.
But it's not the same as the Leslie. The Leslie does a lot more than that. The Leslie does cause a bit of a pitch shift simply because of the Doppler effect, because the speaker is
a speed change,
rotating.
Accelerating.
Well, the distance from you to that speaker is constantly changing, and that's what causes a minor
but
pitch.
to speed up and slow down, the acceleration and deceleration is a big part of it.
Well, that's another part of it, because you're going from slow speed to fast speed and fast speed back to slow speed, and that's something
important part of it.
That's part of the expression, if you will, of the instrument.
Everybody has their own little way of doing that.
That's right.
And the way you do that, like building up to a chorus and then letting it wind down back into the verse.
That's exactly right.
That's where the specialty player, like specialists, know all the little nuances.
Yeah, because it causes an emotional sense that it conveys in the music. When you bring the Leslie on, it lifts everything. It lifts the energy level. And then when you turn the Leslie off, it lets it come back down.
So cool.
So just that emotional change, you can impart that going in and out of a chorus, and it does the work.
It's really deep though, all the little things, and it's all brilliant how he did it, but it's like, I don't know, it's a lot of combinations of tone, but even the switches and the stuff is like, getting used to it. I mean, being fair enough, like any instrument has got its nuances, but like synthesizers, like the modern synthesizer, you got wires, you got all these matrices, you got filters, you got all this crazy stuff, which is really awesome. Like Moogs are great. I mean, all that, the original sequencers and analog synthesizers, why do you think that those are so preferred than the, plug-in versions, which are pretty good now too, You think it's sort of the same thing with the original synthesizers, just the visceral response? I think it's the engineering of electronics too. Like, this is more than the visceral response. It's also great engineering.
There's
like the Moog stuff. I mean,
there's also
a combination of filters and synthesis and all that. I mean,
I think there's also some organic content that comes along when something is not completely digital or completely digitally created. For instance, the Hammond, again, getting back to this, there's 91 tone wheels. They're all generating these pure sine waves. If they were completely 100% in lockstep with each other, blending them together wouldn't have the same effect. It wouldn't have the same width, if you will.
It's like precision because it's a digital file that puts it at the micro.
Yeah, and I know the ones that they model, when they model a Hammond, they take this into account and they
There's
compensate
like gravity
for it.
involved in this.
Well, but what's going on here is it's a mechanical thing. There's 91 tone wheels all geared off a central drive shaft, and the drive shaft has resilient couplings in it. Yeah. And it's constantly, because of the synchronous motor.
But there's a lot of gravity involved with that. That's what I'm saying. These different size things.
Right. And it's constantly adjusting itself to keep in step with the wall voltage. Well, that slight movement up and down transmits very slowly through all this linkage and network. Basically, all of these tones kind of are drifting against each other a little bit. And that's actually what happens in real life. When you pluck a guitar string, the harmonics are not in lockstep with the fundamental. They're actually drifting. You can watch this, you can see them travel back and forth across the string. So what they've done by creating these tones with this mechanical linkage and a drive shaft running the length of the organ, they've actually created this little variation and drift between the different frequencies that ends up giving this a lot more depth.
Personality.
There's some movement that goes on.
I think that's one of the huge differences between that and anything digital.
It's basically the sloppiness of it comes into play and actually gives us something beneficial.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it, and often that's true. But I think even the speed of light all the electronic stuff is still the speed of light, but there's the gravity mechanical slew, like the analog version of slew rates. Like slew rates for electronics, like for electricity to go through the components, there's actually a slew rate for how fast it rises and falls and stuff like that. So there is a bit of like a resistance to even the electrons. All right, but you know, when you add the mechanical weight of a key, the drive shaft spinning, all these other physical, you know, mass, things with mass, whereas something in digital has no mass.
Right.
And the speed of light is so instant that there's no, you know, there's no interaction with the real world.
And there's randomness that comes into it. And again, that just gives us this, it's basically a thicker sound because you've got movement between the harmonics.
Great. Well, speaking of randomness, this would be another good place for us to pause when we're going to resume when we have more storage space. Bye.